Hey there! Welcome back to part 2. I'm really glad you're here. I hope you've already checked out the first part, Law number 1, Control Your Inner Storm. If you haven't yet, no worries, just hop down to the description. I've left the link there for you. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss a thing on this channel. Oh, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. Let's chat. Now, let's move to law number 2, guard your energy. Power is not only gained by what you do, it is preserved by what you refuse to waste yourself upon. Power does not only reside in decisive action, it lives equally in the strength you have not yet spent. The most dangerous illusion for a leader, a warrior, or any player of the great games of life is that energy is infinite, that you can throw yourself into every battle, answer every challenge, and still have enough for the moments that truly decide your fate. Energy is the invisible currency of power, and like any currency, it is finite. If you exhaust it on the trivial, you will be bankrupt when the vital moment arrives. History is rich with examples of those who understood this law and those who ignored it. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany, unified a nation not by engaging in every quarrel, but by picking his battles with surgical precision. Over 8 years, he fought only 3 wars, against Denmark, Austria, and France, each one calculated to advance his central aim of German unity. Between these, he avoided countless opportunities for smaller conflicts. His rivals took his restraint for hesitation, yet in truth it was the deliberate hoarding of political, diplomatic, and military capital. When he acted with overwhelming force because his reserves were intact. Now place beside Bismarck the figure of Napoleon Bonaparte after 1812. He had already bent much of Europe to his will, but he could not resist the lure of one more campaign, the invasion of Russia. It was not essential to his survival, it was a contest of pride. The march into Russia drained his army, treasury, and political standing. When winter closed its fist around his forces, the Grande Armée was crippled, and within 3 years Napoleon's empire collapsed. It was not lack of genius that destroyed him, but the reckless exhaustion of his strength on a war that could never repay its cost. The disciplined know that energy must be preserved not only against the demands of today, but for the demands that have not yet revealed themselves. This is the same wisdom that moves a chess master to decline tempting captures in the opening, holding back their pieces for the middle game when the board will be more open, the stakes more decisive. Philosophers have seen this truth as clearly as generals. Epictetus urged his students to ignore matters outside their control, for to spend effort on them was to drain the reserves needed for what could be changed. The Taoist sages spoke of wu wei, non-action, not as idleness, but as action that is so perfectly timed and aligned with the natural flow that it costs almost nothing. In the Islamic tradition, the virtue of sabr, patient endurance, is not passive suffering, but the will to hold one's strength until it can be used with maximum effect. Modern science has given these ancient truths a name: decision fatigue. Each choice, each exertion of willpower drains a limited mental resource. Presidents and military leaders often arrange their schedules to eliminate unnecessary decisions, wearing the same style of clothing daily, eating the same breakfast, automating small choices, all to preserve their focus for matters that shape the course of nations. But the world is full of forces eager to deplete you before you can deploy yourself to full effect. Some are obvious enemies. Others are the smiling acquaintances, the small demands, the endless minor disputes that arrive dressed as obligations. Emperor Hongwu of the Ming Dynasty refused to let every petitioner speak to him directly. Their requests passed through layers of court review. "If I answer every voice," he said, "I will have no voice left for the empire." To guard your energy is to build invisible walls around your time, your focus, and your emotions. This does not mean avoiding effort. It means rationing it as you would water in a siege. Every unnecessary word, every indulgence in petty conflict, every impulsive commitment is a crack in the cistern. It also means resisting the vanity of constant action. Many leaders mistake visible busyness for influence, imagining that to always be in motion is to appear indispensable. But perpetual motion is a performance for others, not a strategy for oneself. Otto von Bismarck appeared inactive for long stretches, letting small matters pass without interference because he knew the value of the energy they would have cost him. A predator does not lunge at every movement in the grass. It waits for the moment when the kill will be clean. Timing is the multiplier of energy. A force released too early dissipates. The same force, held and unleashed at the right instant, is decisive. The samurai trained not for endless cuts, but for the single perfect strike when the opponent left an opening. To guard your energy is to cultivate the patience for that moment and the readiness to act without hesitation when it arrives. Yet preservation is not only about restraint, it is also about renewal. In war, armies rotate units off the front lines, not because they are weak, but to keep them strong. The same applies to the mind and the body. Those who refuse to rest confuse endurance with effectiveness, and only when their judgment falters do they realize that fatigue has already robbed them of their advantage. Rest, taken deliberately, is not absence from the fight. It is the sharpening of the blade before the next engagement. Guard your energy as you would a fortress. Let the small and petty exhaust themselves against your walls while you stand watch, your strength untouched, waiting for the moment when one decisive act will end the siege entirely. The wisdom of guarding energy is not bound to one culture or one age. It has surfaced wherever power has had to endure. In the Roman Republic, the general Quintus Fabius Maximus earned the name Cunctator, the delayer, for his refusal to meet Hannibal in open battle after the Carthaginians' devastating victories. Rome's citizens mocked him for cowardice, craving the glory of a decisive clash. But Fabius knew that one rash engagement could destroy Rome's last army. Instead, he shadowed Hannibal, harassing his supply lines, avoiding full confrontation until the invader's strength had ebbed. He was not saving his life. He was saving the life of the Republic. His countrymen did not see it then, but history does. It was not the dramatic charge that preserved Rome, but the disciplined withholding of energy until the conditions favored victory. In China, centuries later, Zhuge Liang of the Shu Han kingdom faced similar odds. His forces were often outnumbered, his resources thin. Yet he understood that the mind was a weapon as potent as the sword. In one famous encounter, knowing his city was undefended, he ordered the gates thrown open and sat calmly atop the walls, playing a guqin. His enemy, suspecting an ambush, retreated. Without drawing his bow or spilling a drop of blood, Zhuge Liang preserved his army's strength and bought more time for his cause. The victory lay not in confrontation, but in conserving what could not be replaced. The same principle guarded the Mali Empire's golden age under Mansa Musa. Though famed for his wealth, Musa did not scatter it in constant displays. His generosity on his pilgrimage to Mecca was legendary, but it was calculated, a single grand gesture that established Mali's prestige across the Islamic world. In governance, he spent with restraint, investing in trade, cities, and alliances that would feed the empire's strength for decades. Power is not maintained by spending for its own sake, whether in gold or in effort, but by using reserves in ways that multiply them. Those who fail to learn this law often fall to overextension. Charles XII of Sweden was a military prodigy in his youth, defeating larger powers and expanding his realm. But he could not resist the temptation to press farther, to keep the momentum alive even when consolidation was needed. Years of ceaseless campaigning drained Sweden's resources and soldiers. By the time he faced Russia at Poltava, his army was exhausted, his supply lines stretched, and his advantage gone. The battle destroyed his power, but the real defeat had come years earlier in the slow, invisible depletion of his reserves. Guarding energy is not always about avoiding battle. Sometimes it means retreating on your own terms. Hannibal, master of maneuver in the Second Punic War, often withdrew not in panic but in calculation. After his crushing victory at Cannae, he did not march on Rome, not because he lacked courage, but because he knew the siege would bleed him dry without promise of success. Instead, he shifted to a war of attrition, forcing Rome to spend its own strength year after year. Survival in hostile territory for over a decade was possible only because he rationed his forces as carefully as a miser counts his coins. Energy, once gone, cannot be willed back by force of ambition alone. Many fall into the trap of thinking that drive can replace reserves, that a fierce will can overcome exhaustion. But an empty vessel cannot pour, and a spent army cannot fight. The wise understand that restraint is not a lack of courage, it is courage's most disciplined form. To live by this law requires a constant internal accounting. You must know at every stage not only how much strength you have, but how much each engagement will cost. The trivial must be dismissed without a second thought. The marginal must be weighed against future need. And only the essential, the decisive, should receive the full measure of your effort. This is why the greatest strategists appear detached from small matters. They are not indifferent, they are conserving. The mistake most people make is confusing movement with progress. A falcon may circle in the sky for hours, conserving its energy, ignoring distractions, waiting for the precise moment to strike. To the casual eye, it is doing nothing. Yet, when the moment comes, its dive is swift, accurate, and lethal. Those who have spent themselves in constant motion cannot match that precision. They are panting when they should be striking. Guarding energy begins with the recognition that every engagement, no matter how small, carries a cost. This is not only a matter of physical exertion, but of mental focus and emotional steadiness. A general does not commit troops to every skirmish along the frontier because each deployment leaves fewer soldiers ready for the decisive campaign. In the same way, you must learn to decide which calls on your time and attention merit a response, and which should be left to fade into nothing. This requires a form of personal reconnaissance, a quiet study of yourself. Where do you lose strength unnecessarily? Which people or situations consistently leave you drained without advancing your objectives? Once identified, these become your leaks, and like breaches in a fortress wall, they must be sealed. Some will be plugged through delegation, assigning lesser tasks to others. Some will be addressed by limiting access, ensuring that not every demand can reach you unfiltered. The most disciplined leaders create these layers not to appear distant, but to remain effective. The temptation to respond to everything is often rooted in vanity. Many cannot bear the thought of being seen as idle or unimportant. They imagine that to always be visible is to always be powerful. But power does not come from constant presence, it comes from selective presence. Bismarck's long silences between political moves did not weaken him, they strengthened the impact of every decision he eventually made. Invisibility, when chosen, can be a weapon. Energy is amplified through timing. Effort expended at the wrong moment is wasted. The same effort held in reserve and deployed at the right instant can change the course of events. The samurai who keeps their sword sheathed while the opponent expends themselves in wild strikes knows that when the moment comes, a single cut will be enough. The same principle applies in diplomacy, negotiation, and even personal conflict. Yet guarding energy is not simply a matter of restraint. It is also the deliberate practice of renewal. In war, commanders rotate their troops away from the front lines so that they remain sharp for the next engagement. The same principle applies to the mind. It must be allowed intervals of rest to recover its clarity. This is why the most effective leaders do not fill every moment with meetings, why skilled negotiators sometimes walk away from the table for a day, and why elite athletes treat recovery as seriously as training. Rest is not absence from the fight, it is the preparation for the next one. To guard your energy is to hold your strength close, to choose your expenditures as a king chooses where to spend his gold, not in every marketplace, but in the projects that will shape the future of the realm. It is to be unmoved by the provocation of small matters, to let them exhaust themselves against the outer walls while your true reserves remain untouched. History offers sharp reminders of what happens when this law is ignored. In 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union while already engaged in campaigns across Europe and North Africa. The Wehrmacht's initial advance was breathtaking, but it burned through manpower, equipment, and supplies at a rate the nation could not sustain. By the time winter set in, the German forces were overextended, their energy spent. The Soviet counterattack did not simply defeat an army, it crushed a war machine that had drained itself before delivering the final blow. The lesson is as clear for the individual as for the empire. When you spread yourself too thin, even great strength becomes fragile. Guard your energy as if your survival depends on it, because it does. Every action you take should be weighed not only for its immediate value, but for the cost it demands from the reserves you will need tomorrow. The true masters of power endure not because they fight every battle, but because they arrive at the decisive one with their strength unbroken. Spend your energy as you would a king's treasury, sparingly, strategically, and only where the return will be greater than the cost. The truth of guarding one's energy is not confined to generals and statesmen. It is woven into the spiritual teachings of the world's most enduring traditions. The Buddha taught that unwise action begins with the stirring of the mind. Desire, anger, and ignorance consume energy before a single physical movement is made. The discipline of mindfulness, watching thoughts without being carried away by them, is, in its essence, the guarding of energy at its most subtle level. To pause before reacting, to observe the rise of an emotion without being ruled by it, is to keep one's reserves intact. The Dhammapada cautions, "The fool who is angry is his own enemy." This is not merely moral advice, it is strategy. The angry squander their strength in the moment of anger and arrive at the true battle already weakened. In the teachings of Jesus, we find a similar current. He spoke often of turning the other cheek, walking the extra mile, and answering hatred with calm. These were not acts of surrender. They were deliberate refusals to be drawn into the exhausting cycles of retaliation that drain communities and individuals alike. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when his disciples drew a sword in defense, he told them to put it away, knowing that to meet force with force at that moment would only hasten destruction. His choice preserved the energy of his message, which endured long after the swords of his time had rusted. In Hindu epics, Lord Krishna counsels the warrior Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita to act without attachment to the fruits of action. This detachment is not indifference. It is the ability to focus on the duty at hand without wasting mental and emotional energy on fear, pride, or outcome. The warrior who acts in this spirit is not tossed about by success or failure. His energy remains steady, unshaken by the temporary winds of fortune. From the Taoist sages comes the image of water, soft, yielding, and patient, yet capable of wearing down stone over centuries. Water does not spend itself in futile resistance. It flows around obstacles, conserving its nature, waiting for the moment when persistence will triumph. This is the essence of strategic energy preservation, not to stop moving, but to move in ways that cost the least and gain the most. The preservation of energy is not only a personal safeguard, it is also a weapon in psychological warfare. To withhold visible effort, to remain calm when others expect you to act, is to force them into uncertainty. The opponent who cannot read your intentions will waste their own energy trying to provoke a reaction. In negotiations, a long pause unsettles the impatient. In conflict, silence and stillness can suggest hidden strength, forcing adversaries to commit resources prematurely. The greatest danger to a restless rival is not your attack, it is your refusal to attack until they have already weakened themselves. This tactic was used by Shogun Ieyasu in Japan, by Fabian in Rome, and by countless leaders who understood that the mind of the opponent is as much a battlefield as the ground beneath your feet. When you guard your energy, you control the rhythm of the engagement. Those who try to force your hand become trapped in their own urgency. The long game in power belongs always to those who preserve their reserves. The satisfaction of an immediate victory is often smaller than the cost it demands. The history of empires shows this with cruel clarity. Many powers that seemed unstoppable fell not because of one defeat, but because their constant expansion drained their economic, political, and human capital until they could no longer withstand a single well-timed blow. Rome's endurance for centuries was not the result of constant conquest, but of periods of consolidation, infrastructure building, and the careful replenishing of legions. China's dynasties that lasted longest were those that avoided overextending into endless wars, focusing instead on fortifying their borders and cultivating the wealth of their people. The British Empire, in its height, mastered the art of indirect rule, conserving the military and administrative energy that direct occupation would have drained. In each case, the decision to hold back in certain arenas was the very thing that allowed them to act decisively in others. At the highest level, this law is not simply about the survival of individuals, but of entire civilizations. Societies that pour their resources into endless conflict, vanity projects, or internal disputes often collapse from exhaustion even before an external enemy strikes. Those that last understand the necessity of cycles, times of action, times of restraint, and times of renewal. Guarding energy, then, is a philosophy of survival. It is the recognition that your strength, whether as a person, a leader, or a nation, is not measured by how much you can do today, but by how much you will still be able to do when the decisive moment comes. The unwise seek to prove their power in constant displays. The wise prove it in the silence between actions, in the strength they hold back, in the readiness that endures when others have spent themselves to exhaustion. Your energy is your inheritance, your capital, and your weapon. Use it as the masters have always done, sparingly, strategically, and with an eye not on the applause of the moment, but on the victory that will matter in the end. All right, that's a wrap for part 2. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate your time and energy. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and keeps the content coming your way. And be sure to check out part 3, where we dive into Law 3, Accept Your Shadow. It's going to be a powerful one, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Until then, take care and keep growing. See you in the next one.